Today I'm down in Southern California getting hands-on with the least expensive all-wheel drive SUV in North America. It is the 2025 Nissan Kicks, which has been completely redesigned to not only give buyers the option of all-wheel drive, but also give you a ton more tech on the inside than we found in the last generation Kicks. Now, Kicks shoppers have a tough decision ahead of them because for about $25,000, including destination or less, you could choose between two different front-wheel drive trims or the least expensive all-wheel drive trim, which comes in at $24,720, including destination. So do you want more stuff on the inside and more stuff on the outside, or do you want all-wheel drive and slightly better handling? Let's talk about what you get and what you don't get in the various trims of Kicks, and of course, we'll try and decide which one might be right for you. Instead of the Russian nesting doll design theme that we found in the previous generation Kicks, where it looked a lot like the rest of Nissan's SUV lineup, they decided to give the new Kicks more of a unique design. Now, we don't know what the Murano is going to look like. That's going to be released in a few months, but we know that this doesn't look like the new Armada, which has more of a traditional Nissan V-Motion grille up front. Modified, of course, for 2025. One of the most distinctive features about this design are these multi-module LED daytime running lights that are integrated into this very horizontal grille that really adds to the sense of width in the Kicks, and indeed this is wider than the last generation model. It's about 1.5 inches wider. Most of that goes straight into the interior, where you do find more shoulder room and more hip room than before. If you live in the city, you're probably going to appreciate the touches that we find in this top-end SR trim, like the front and rear parking sensors. We also have a 360-degree camera integrated right there into the middle of that new Nissan logo. And adaptive cruise control is standard in every Kicks model. But unlike some of the competition where they're using camera-only adaptive cruise control, this actually has a radar sensor right there in the middle of the bumper. Versus driver assistance systems that are camera-only based, radar sensor-based systems generally tend to be better in inclement weather. So think fog, rain, etc. And they seem to have fewer false positives and better adaptive cruise control performance than the camera-only systems, especially that we find in General Motors inexpensive vehicles. So between the two systems, this is going to be smoother and a bit more normative feeling versus the camera-only systems that we find in the inexpensive GM crossovers. The new Kicks isn't just wider than the old model, it's longer and taller as well. At 171.9 inches from tip to tail, this is about 2.5 inches longer than the old version, and that's because it rides on an all-new platform. Some of the growth happens up front in the crash structure area, and some of it happens back there in the cargo area. Interestingly, the passenger compartment, when it comes to legroom and headroom, it's almost identical to the old version. So again, really the big improvement inside is the width of the cabin, giving you a little bit more shoulder room. But visually, you'll really notice the higher roofline, definitely making this look more like a mini SUV than the previous version. This is the SR trim, so we have the satin chrome roof rails there, the chrome windows trim right there, the floating window design, floating roofline design that we see in other Nissan models. Of course, we also get 19-inch wheels in this SR trim, but every version is going to get 8.4 inches of ground clearance, and definitely more of a mini SUV vibe than we find in the Chevy Trax, which really has a much lower roofline. Definitely is a hatchback without the lift. That floating roof hides kind of a cool Easter egg. It's a little bit difficult to see in this strong sunlight, but you actually have Kicks spelled out right there in the glass, and you can see all the way through to the body-colored section behind. The Kicks has a distinctive design whether it's coming or going, and in the back we have perhaps the most controversial design theme, which is this sort of oval theme going on back here with the matte black plastic lower bumper and then the shiny black plastic taillights and then this shiny black bar that connects everything across the back. Let me know what you think about that design down there below. It definitely doesn't look like anything else in the Nissan lineup. One thing I really like though are that the taillights are full LEDs. So LED backup lights, LED turn signals, LED brake lights, everything's an LED back here. Of course, we're driving the SR trim, so things are going to look a little bit different depending on the trim you're looking at. And this model, of course, is going to get the parking sensors again, both front and rear. One of the most common complaints about the previous generation Kicks was that it felt a little bit underpowered. So of course, Nissan has changed that by giving us a new engine and a new transmission under the hood. This is a 2-liter 4-cylinder producing 141 horsepower, 140 pound-feet of torque, and it's mated to an all-new CVT. CVT is the only way to go. If you choose all-wheel drive, you'll get 30 miles per gallon. If you choose front-wheel drive, you'll get 31 miles per gallon combined, according to the EPA. Like many small crossovers on the market, choosing the option box for all-wheel drive doesn't just bring all-weather traction, it also includes a fully independent rear suspension. If you choose front-wheel drive, like this particular Smurf Blue model is equipped with, then we get a twist beam axle in the rear. So it's not going to be quite as much fun when the road gets winding, and the rear suspension is going to become just a little bit more upset over broken pavement. The difference is not huge, but it's definitely there, and it's another reason you might want to choose that $1,500 option. Now let's check out the interior, starting with the front seats. One thing to know is that there is no power driver seat available in the Kicks. It's manual all the way, even in this top-end trim. I don't find that to be too much of a problem because of the value pricing of the Kicks, but I do wish that we had at least manually adjustable lumbar support. That's something I would love to see in the future. I find these seats to be very comfortable for my body shape, but I like more lumbar support than I know a lot of people do. And this is more towards my side of the preference line than a lot of folks that really prefer more of a flat seat back. So be sure you're okay with the seats before you sign on the dotted line. Again though, for me, I actually find these seats to be above average when it comes to comfort. We also have a tilt telescopic steering column with an above average range of motion. So this is definitely going to be easier if you're a family where you have tall drivers and short drivers driving the same vehicle. The front seat tracks move pretty far rearward, and with this seat all the way down, I have several inches of headroom left, even in the model with the moonroof. As I said before, the interior dimensions of the Kicks haven't changed too much except for the extra width that we get in the cabin. So with this front seat comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, I still have about 5 inches of legroom left there, reasonable amount. You'll notice a bigger difference if I try and sit in the middle because the rear bench is a little bit wider than before. We still have some pretty pronounced buckets for the outboard seat position, which means I'm sitting notably higher off the ground and further forward than I was in the outboard seating position. And that means my head's basically touching this part of the ceiling right where that panoramic moonroof is. If I move all the way over to this side, this front seat's all the way back in its tracks. I have maybe about an inch of legroom left there. If you're wondering about child seats, let's see how they might fit behind me as a driver. We just measure 11 inches down on the seat back and then across, and we get 28.5 inches. That's almost enough room for the average rear-facing child seat. Remember, you do want a little bit of clearance between the child seat and the driver's seat in most vehicles. This is kind of acceptable for this category. There are certainly going to be smaller entries. If you're looking at something like a Toyota Corolla Cross, it's going to be considerably tighter in the back. However, if you're looking at a Honda HR-V, it's pretty generous in the rear. Back here we have a fold-down center armrest with 2 cup holders, no air vents in the rear, but we do have some USB-C charge-only ports. Going in for a closer look, the rear door panels are made from almost entirely hard plastics except for that armrest right there in the middle. And one thing worth noting, if you buy one of these, I would suggest getting a full floor mat set because instead of typical carpet, we find what looks more like an expensive car trunk liner right there in the middle. So we do have the floor mats on each side, but I would get one of those ones that covers that hump in the middle if I were you. That does not tend to wear as well as the carpet floor mat. Behind the manual hatch, we find 30 cubic feet of cargo capacity behind the rear seats. That is absolutely enormous for this segment. Unfortunately, we do have one of these hard cargo dividers rather than one of the roller style shades, so that does mean if you want to use all of the cargo, you are going to have to remove this from the vehicle and then find somewhere to put it. Let's see if it fits under the floor. It does not. So that is one downside. We don't have the ability to stow that under the floor when you don't need it, so you're gonna have to leave that in the Home Depot parking lot. But on the other hand, we have an absolutely enormous and a very square cargo area, including a 2-stage load floor and a storage well underneath that's big enough to put some of these larger roller bags. That's a 22-inch carry-on sized roller bag. As you can see, it fits completely under the floor. Now, just in case you're wondering, you can get a Kicks with a spare tire. There's one with that spare tire right there under the floor. If you're a fan of a lower load floor, which is certainly going to let you put some of those larger bags in place, then you can drop that down and that would allow you to line up 22-inch roller bags all the way across the rear, definitely put some extra cargo in there and still certainly close the hatch. Now, in case you're wondering, with the load floor in its lowest height, you can put 22-inch roller luggage right there in the upright position, and that hard cargo cover will actually fit right into place. As we look around this interior, keep in mind this is the top-end SR trim, and it has the optional premium package, which includes this big panoramic moonroof, the Bose personal audio system, and heated seats. The panoramic moonroof is also available in the SV trim, but you can't get the Bose personal audio system if you choose that SV trim. So this is SR only. That big panoramic roof goes to just about the rear passenger's lap area, and again, those rear passengers, especially in the middle, might be bumping their heads on the back of that track. So that's one reason you might want to skip that particular option. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and the front passenger. We also have slide to the side sun visors. Up here we have LED map lights and a sunglass holder. It's kind of a nice touch there. Speaking of the Bose audio system, that's one big change for 2025. Previously, only the driver had the surround speakers. Now the front passenger gets them as well. We have contrasting stitching in red and sort of a light gray on the imitation leather portion of this seat. It is combination imitation leather and fabric upholstery. So we have fabric inserts for the majority of that seat back and almost the entire seat bottom cushion. And it has kind of a red accent that's really intriguing. So it has red threads in a grid of charcoal, giving it definitely a cool look. And that's both for the front and the rear seats. As you can see, the bolstering is a little bit more aggressive than I had expected for such an inexpensive vehicle, but again, keep in mind that lumbar support's also pretty aggressive, so certainly spend some time in these seats and decide if they're right for you. I personally think they're among the most comfortable in this segment, at least for me, however. Moving over to the doors, we find a surprising percentage of soft touch materials. So an entire upper section right there, that's all stitched materials with, again, that same sort of contrasting stitching. Below that, we also find stitched materials, but these have been textured to look more like carbon fiber than, I guess you'd say, Naugahyde. Up here, we do have hard plastics around that door handle and the door pull, and then, of course, around that bottle holder at the bottom of the door. Instead of piano black, we have kind of a brushed metal theme for the plastics right there around the window switches. I definitely appreciate that, but you know, we couldn't escape all the piano black. Sadly, there is still some up here at the top of the dashboard around those air vents. I'll show you those on the driver's side in just a bit. And then we have Bose speakers in the A-pillars there as well. Surprisingly, there's also a high percentage of soft touch materials and premium materials on the dashboard. So this entire upper section of the dash, this is actually a stitched component as well as a stitched midsection here using the same materials that we found on the doors. That piano black strip runs all the way across. Hard plastics, of course, lower on the dashboard. Big bin-style glove compartment. You'd definitely be able to fit an 11-inch tablet computer inside there. The SR trim is the only one that gets this big twin 12.3-inch LCD setup in the dashboard, although interestingly it's not the only one to get twin LCDs, because the base model gets a 7-inch cluster and a 7-inch infotainment system. Unfortunately, it does not run the same software version that this one does, so it doesn't support any sort of smartphone integration at all. As you can see, this is running the latest Nissan software, pretty similar to what we find in the Aria and some other upcoming Nissan products. It's definitely snappy and easy to use. In this vehicle, it does not support factory navigation, but that's actually okay with me because we have that wireless smartphone integration. You can also connect wired if you'd rather use the USB port, and that's definitely my personal preference as far as connecting with the system. Going down from there, you can see that same, again, texture that we saw before. And I just forgot one thing. It's worth noting, if you get the SV trim, you get this screen in the middle, but you still get the smaller 7-inch LCD instrument cluster. Kind of an interesting twist. So this is, again, the only one with this twin LCD setup with the big LCDs. The other ones have twin LCDs, just different than the ones you see here. Now, moving down from that LCD, we find an access button for the 360-degree camera system with moving object detection, basically borrowed out of other Nissans. Physical power and volume knob, track forward, backward, hazard light button, and then touch controls for the single zone automatic climate control system that we find in this model. I am a little bit concerned that that might scratch more easily over time, especially if you're the kind of person that likes to change those settings regularly. Below that, we have a pretty big center console here. Nice big Qi wireless charging mat that can easily accommodate those large smartphones while wireless charging, and it will also wireless charge through thicker cases, something I appreciate. 2 of the 4 USB-C ports are up here. Those 2 interface with the system. The ones on the back of the center console are charge only. We have an engine start-stop button there, electric parking brake, auto brake hold, nice feature for an inexpensive vehicle. Drive mode selector right there. Pretty traditional console shifter. Drive and B for increased engine braking. Sport mode, that's over there with that drive mode selector. The center console, as I said, is relatively large, which means we have some pretty big and pretty deep cup holders. That means that if you like big takeout drinks, they're definitely going to more easily fit in here than some of the smaller options in this segment. Moving back from there, we find a relatively small center armrest, again, that same contrasting stitching, and then a teeny tiny little storage bin underneath that. One thing I was surprised to see, but I appreciate, is the fact that the side of the center console is actually wrapped in the same sort of stitched material that we find over there on the doors, definitely giving it more of a premium feel. Moving up here to the steering wheel, we find one of Nissan's flat bottom steering wheel designs. It's definitely an attractive look. the new Nissan logo right there in the middle. Some relatively small sport grips up top, but a comfortable sort of 3-spoke design. These very horizontal spokes and then the split bottom spoke right there. On the top of these spokes, we do of course find more of that piano black. Again, I'm a little bit concerned about scratching on that, but the rest of the controls are logical and easy laid out, and they're not touch controls, which I appreciate. So this controls that multifunction LCD cluster. You get basically 2 looks, the dials there, or more of a linear theme with those dials horizontal there. And if I go over to that home screen, you can see that they expand out to some bigger horizontal displays there. On this side, we have the button for the adaptive cruise control system. That is standard on every trim. And then over here we have the turn signal stalks. We find, of course, the headlight switch, so they weren't trying to minimalize some of those switches like we find in GM's products. This is the steering assist button, heated steering wheel button, and a button to disable the auto start stop. So yep, you can disable that. Now above that, let's take a look at this very shiny piece of piano black. Obviously, it's definitely very shiny, but the other thing that I noticed is that even though this vehicle has just 572 miles on it, the piano black actually already shows a few fine scratches from its initial cleaning. So that is one thing that I'm a little bit concerned about long term. It's a bit difficult to see in the strong light, but here you can see just barely the ambient lighting strip that's integrated into the dashboard. It's over here flashing because of the refresh rate on the camera. Actually, it's a little bit easier to show you where it is because it's flashing like that. But that's also a nice touch in a relatively inexpensive vehicle. Keep in mind that the MSRP for this model is under $30,000, including destination. All right, it's time to get the kicks out on the road. When it comes to acceleration, there is something you should know about this CVT. Since I started from a stop, the engine's just hanging out right there at 6,000 RPM, kind of like a sewing machine. That's not what happens if you start from, say, 5 or 10 miles an hour. So say we're already moving. Now I floor it, wait for it, wait for it. Now we're gonna get shifts. And the shifts are crisper than we've seen in some of Nissan's CVTs in the past, but it does mean that if you want to go from 0 to 60 the fastest possible, you have to stop from a complete standstill. Then it will take 7.9 seconds. That's our preliminary testing down here in Southern California. My estimate from 5 miles an hour to 60 miles an hour indicates that it actually adds about 0.2 of a second to the 0 to 60 time if you want to let it imitate those shifts. Whether or not that's pleasing to you, I will let you decide, but let me know down there in the comments section, because personally, I would rather have a CVT just hang out there at a particular RPM, not pretend like it's a stepped automatic transmission, because that's going to be the most efficient and the quickest 0 to 60. Now, if you want to have more of a traditional CVT feel, you can put the transmission in B for engine braking mode, and here it's going to stay right around 4,500 RPM, and it's not going to do those imitation shifts. So you do have a number of options. When it comes to the stopping distance, we measured 121 feet in our preliminary testing down here in Southern California. Keep in mind, we're not testing on the usual road surface, so that could be a little bit shorter or a little bit longer by the time we get this home. Also keep in mind, this SR trim has 19-inch wheels on it and 225 tires, so these are a little bit wider than the tire you find in the base version. Now, putting everything together when the road gets a little bit more winding, this is certainly more engaging feeling than the previous generation of the kicks. It doesn't seem like it has that much more power, but there's a reasonable amount more low-end torque, and they've really improved the transmission feel in this generation. Again, we have those transmission shifts, but they feel more believable, more crisp, and more like a traditional automatic transmission. The combination of the new transmission and the suspension tuning definitely makes this more fun than the outgoing kicks. Although, this is certainly firmer than the old kicks was when we're talking about ride quality. You will definitely feel those minor imperfections coming through into the cabin, and you will certainly hear more road noise than I had expected coming through into the cabin when the road surface is less than perfectly paved. Keep in mind, of course, these are the 19-inch wheels with low-profile tires, so if you get the SV or the S trim, you're going to have more cushion, so expect ride quality to be a little bit better in those models. I am surprised, however, that even though this does not have the independent suspension in the back, it's pretty well behaved over broken pavement. In these corners here, it definitely has a good feel to it. I was able to drive both the front-wheel drive and the all-wheel drive model, and I have to say that even as good as this is, I would certainly choose the all-wheel drive model for my personal commute because I drive on fun, winding roads all the time, and it definitely has the edge when it comes to the suspension tuning. The rear suspension does not become as upset over broken pavement. Again, this is really well controlled, but you will definitely feel the rear end skip a little bit over broken pavement in some of these corners, We don't get that feel in the all-wheel drive model. Also, you get better traction. Now, admittedly, that's not the biggest thing because this road surface is not the best. If I floor it, no fuss, no muss, really no torque steer going on here because there's just not enough torque coming from the engine to worry about it. On the other hand, if you live in an area that gets snow, ice, really rainy area, or you live on a gravel road like I do, you might want to add all-wheel drive for that extra traction and that extra peace of mind. Because, of course, if I were to just pull slightly off the road here, there is certainly enough power here to get some slip. Not a lot of slip, mind you, on that gravel section of the road, but you can get some slip in the system. Now let's turn left on this highway and see how everything goes together. Again, no drama. There's enough power that it doesn't feel like you're gonna get rear-ended immediately. And after a short while here, we're already at the speed limit. So it's not a big deal to merge onto highways like that. Now let's talk about the competition and talk about how this stacks up. The Chevy Trax, obviously a very direct competitor if we're talking about the front-wheel drive model. It does not have an independent rear suspension, but I think it actually has a sportier vibe than this. I love the top-end trim with really wide tires. That is an awful lot of fun to drive. I also appreciate the combination of the 3-cylinder turbo and the 6-speed automatic transmission. I think that combo works really well. If you're not a fan of turbos though, this is the way to go. But you have to have a CVT. And CVTs are really the norm in this segment. You'll find them in just about every other option outside of something like the Trax, certain versions of the Trailblazer, of course the Mazda CX-30. Most of the competition, however, is going to be more expensive than the kicks, and that's really the thing to keep in mind. Is a Hyundai Kona more fun? Is it faster? Yes and yes. It's also more expensive. Is something like the Toyota Corolla Cross going to be more fuel efficient if you get the hybrid? Absolutely, but it's going to be about $8,000 more than this. That's nearly 50% more. Over a day of mixed driving, we've been averaging 28.5 miles per gallon. We've been going up and over a mountain pass between here and Santa Barbara. It's about 2,200 feet or so. So obviously that's going to have an impact on the fuel economy. Any way you slice it, you'll get better fuel economy in a Niro or a Corolla Cross hybrid, but be prepared to pay $7,000 to $8,000 more for those models, and they're not going to be comparably equipped to the kicks. Those are going to be more expensive. And of course, if you want all-wheel drive, that's available on the all-wheel drive Corolla Cross hybrid, but not an option at all in the Niro. On the other hand, Niro is going to give you about 50 miles per gallon. Are you ready for something controversial? Let's talk about how this stacks up against the Mazda CX-30. I don't think it's a cut and dry win for the Mazda. Yes, the Mazda has more power. Yes, it has a 2.5-liter turbo, but it's also more expensive. And in a number of ways, it's not as practical. It also does not feel as modern or as tech-laden as this, with this big 2-screen setup in the dashboard, especially considering this model is under $30,000, including destination. You can get all-wheel drive in here now, big improvement over the previous generation, but also we get much better interior finishes in here, and the previous generation definitely couldn't hold a candle to the interior of the Mazda. Oddly, this now can, and we have nice touches like the premium surround sound system here, the adaptive cruise control that is standard in this model, the improved CVT, etc. The CX-30, I think, is a better vehicle, but is it better enough to justify the price tag, especially given the fact that no version of the Mazda is ever going to have a fully independent rear suspension. And no version of the Mazda is really going to have tires that are wider than this either. So absolute grip numbers are really not that far off, and the rear suspension is no better composed than the model I'm driving here. You actually can get the rear suspension of that CX-30 upset over broken pavement. You will really notice that if driving it back to back to a Hyundai Kona or a Kia Seltos or something along those lines, or even an all-wheel drive Nissan Kicks. Now let's get down to brass tacks. How much is the new Kicks going to cost you? Well, including destination, the base version is $23,220. It looks very much like the model we're looking at here, but there are some things to keep in mind. The S trim is not going to get the twin LCD setup we see here. Instead, it gets two 7-inch LCDs in the dashboard, and neither of them supports smartphone projection. So if you're a fan of Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, you're going to have to step up the line into the SV trim. And at that point, you have some additional decisions to make, because the SV in front-wheel drive form is $25,070, and it's going to be more like what we see here. It's going to have the same infotainment system, it's going to have the smaller LCD instrument cluster, of course, and it is going to have smaller wheels, but they're going to be alloys. Or, for about the same price, you could add all-wheel drive to the base trim. $24,720 is the least expensive all-wheel drive model. For about $300 more, you could choose the SV with more stuff, but you have to give up the independent rear suspension and, of course, the all-wheel drive traction. On the other hand, you gain the bigger LCD, you gain wireless CarPlay and wireless Android Auto support, and you get the alloy wheels as well. You also have the option of adding things like a moonroof to the SV trim and heated seats. Those are not features that are available in the base model, but they're still optional in that SV. Of course, if you want an SR like we're looking at here, this is going to be at least $27,570, but it's going to give you the twin 12.3-inch LCD system, the 360-degree camera system, and the option to add not just the moonroof, which is still optional, but also the Bose personal audio system. And all in, the most expensive SR trim possible is going to be just over $31,000. So we're not talking about an enormous price tag. And that's the big thing to keep in mind with the Kicks. This is going to be significantly less expensive than a wide variety of its direct competition. If we're simply talking about all-wheel drive as an option, you're going to pay about $3,000 more for that in something like the Hyundai Kona or in a Chevy Trailblazer. So whichever direction you go in, all-wheel drive is going to be more expensive. Also, if you want features like the panoramic moonroof that we find in this model, or something akin to the Bose personal audio system we find in this top-end SR trim, you're certainly going to be spending more than $30,000 for those features, and this model as equipped is just under $30,000. You have to choose the all-wheel drive option and the particular dual color paint options in order to get this over $31,000, including destination. This is one of a very limited number of new vehicles you can buy for 2025 actually out the door for under $25,000. If you really only have $25,000 to spend, average sales tax in the US plus tax, title, license, destination charge, etc., this can actually be under $25,000. Will you be able to get all-wheel drive for under $25,000? No, that's going to depend on the state you live in, but it's going to be pretty darn close. And we know that generally speaking, the Kicks has sold a little bit below MSRP. So if you really want one and you really want the best deal on one, you might want to wait about a year after this has been on sale. There are probably going to be some slightly better discounts on it at that time, especially versus something like the HR-V or the Toyota Corolla Cross. And honestly, this is one of the best looking entries in this segment now. I like this just about as much as I like the Kia Soul. I think that really has a distinctive and very practical boxy look, but we have a bigger cargo area in the back. This cargo area is pretty similarly sized to many compact crossovers, and this is technically in the next category down, the subcompact category. So you get nearly compact category size inside for a much smaller price tag, with honestly very few compromises, especially if we're talking about the very top-end trims with the twin LCDs in the dashboard, etc. The Kicks is not the fastest or the most dynamic entry in this segment. If you want something like that, you're gonna have to pay an awful lot more, however. But it holds its own even when pitted against some of the more classic good driving options like the Mazda CX-30. The CX-30 is gonna be more expensive than this. Yes, it offers a 2.5-liter turbo, but you're gonna be paying considerably more for that fully loaded CX-30 than this, and oddly enough, it's not actually going to have an independent suspension in the back, something that is offered in the Kicks but is not offered at any price in the Mazda 3. Let me know what you would pick down there in the comments section below. Again, the value focus here is what's really the important thing to keep in mind with the Kicks. It's not the best in the segment, but I do think unquestionably it is the best value in the segment. And that is exactly what Nissan was going for with the Kicks. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comments section below. And if you're shopping for a Kicks, which model would you pick? Personally, I would skip the base S trim. It doesn't have wireless smartphone integration, actually doesn't have any smartphone integration at all. I would really start with the SV trim, which is going to be right around $25,000, or just opt for the SR trim, fully loaded for about $30,000. All-wheel drive, that's up to you. There is going to be a difference in terms of the rear suspension dynamics, but it's not going to be the biggest deal for a lot of shoppers out there, and you are going to save not only a little bit of money to buy the vehicle, but you'll get 1 mile per gallon better fuel economy. And of course, you can still put things like the sunroof and the Bose personal audio system on that front-wheel drive model as well. See all of you later.